You're going to throw out the trash today. Plastic bottle, soap residue, dented can, maybe a cardboard box. He'll throw it away without thinking. As always. What if I told you that you're discarding the only items that would keep you alive when civilization ceases to function? I'm not talking about a movie apocalypse. I'm talking about what has already happened in other countries, what economists call a supply chain collapse. What you saw in miniature in 2020 when shelves emptied in 72 hours and people fought over toilet paper. Now imagine there's no going back. In this video, I'm going to show you 7 items that are in your trash right now that are worth more than gold when the system shuts down. Not metaphorically, literally, because gold doesn't purify water, gold doesn't light fires, gold doesn't keep you alive. What you throw away every week, this keeps. Stick around until the end. Because the item that most people find most useless is exactly what makes the difference between surviving and becoming a statistic. The network went down. It didn't freeze. It didn't waver. It died. The trucks stopped running 3 weeks ago, not because of a strike, not because of the weather, because the system that kept them moving, the fuel contracts, the digital logistics, the supply chain built on the assumption that nothing would ever truly break down, stopped working. And when one piece fails, the rest doesn't slow down. It collapses. All at once. The supermarkets were emptied within 72 hours. Not looted, emptied. By ordinary people with carts and reusable bags who arrived early and took everything that seemed useful. Canned goods first, then dry goods, then anything packaged. At hour 48, people were fighting over condiments. At hour 72, the shelves weren't just empty. They were being dismantled by the very material of the shelves themselves. That's when reality recalibrated for those who were paying attention. What nobody tells you about the collapse. Wealth doesn't disappear, it just changes address. Your stock portfolio is worthless. Not because the numbers disappeared, but because the numbers ceased to mean anything the moment the infrastructure that gave them meaning went offline. Stock is a promise. A promise requires a functioning system to be fulfilled. When the system stops, the promise becomes paper. Paper becomes dead weight. Dead weight doesn't heat, doesn't feed, doesn't filter water. That trash can you drag to the sidewalk every week without thinking? It's a treasure chest. You just didn't know how to read the code. We've been trained to consume, discard, repeat, convenient, stupid. When supply chains die and factories fall silent, waste becomes the difference between surviving and becoming a statistic. Not as a metaphor. As physics, as chemistry, as thermodynamics applied to human survival. You spent years throwing away tools without knowing they were tools. 5 items rotting in your trash are now worth more than gold when civilization shuts down. Not metaphorically, literally. Gold doesn't purify water. Gold doesn't start fires. Gold doesn't cut, seal, or insulate. Gold just sits there shiny and useless while you freeze holding it. What you discard without thinking is what keeps you breathing. Pay attention. While you're watching this, you have survival supplies in your trash. Not in some specialized depot, not in a military supply store. In your household trash. The same trash you filled last night without a second thought. That's the problem. You don't think twice. You never needed to. But the need arose. Item 1. Plastic bottles. Those disposable bottles that environmentalists use as a symbol of everything that's wrong with consumerism. They're not wrong about the problem. They're wrong about the solution. Throwing them away solves nothing. Saving them solves everything. A plastic bottle is not disposable. It's indestructible. It's a petroleum-based container that has outlived civilizations. It doesn't rust. It doesn't crack on impact. It doesn't absorb moisture. It doesn't rot. Remove the label. What remains is a transparent, waterproof, sealed, lightweight container that is durable enough to withstand years of hard use. Water purification. Fill it up. Leave it in the sun for 6 hours. UV radiation kills pathogens. It's called SOTUS, solar disinfection. It's not folklore. It's a protocol validated by the World Health Organization for populations without access to treated water. You have the necessary equipment in your trash now. Storage container. airtight seal keeps food dry for months, protects against moisture, insects, and contamination. Stack, transport, and seal. Cut off the bottom and you have a funnel. Cut it into strips and you have twine for tying or traps. Melt the edges with heat and you create waterproof pouches for dry bait. Stuff them with dry leaves and use them as a thermal insulation barrier. The plastic flexes but lasts for years under heavy use. Physics doesn't care about the price you paid for it. That thing you threw away after one drink. It's a multi-purpose tool that doesn't break. Item 2. Lint from the dryer filter. That fluffy buildup you scrape off the filter and throw away without even looking at it properly. Without thinking. Just a reflex. Congratulations. You've spent years discarding the most efficient ignition material on the planet. Dryer lint is cotton and synthetic fibers reduced to microscopic filaments with a massive surface area relative to their mass. That's the point. Fire needs contact with oxygen. The greater the surface area exposed to air, the faster the ignition. The lint is essentially pre-processed tinder with near-perfect combustion geometry. A spark. Less than a second. Flame established, burns hot. Sustains the flame long enough to catch larger kindling. No commercial fire starter comes close to this performance-to-weight ratio. None. Collect in a waterproof container or stuff inside empty toilet paper rolls. Seal the ends with wax for fail-safe reliability. Cotton lint burns cleaner and hotter. Synthetic blends produce more smoke but still ignite quickly. Both work. When the temperature drops and you need fire now, not later, lint delivers. The difference between hypothermia and heat is 3 seconds of flame. That trash you've been discarding weekly for years. It's survival currency that weighs nothing and never expires. Item 3. Aluminum cans. You see a 5-cent deposit. I see prefabricated metal that doesn't require casting. Aluminum is lightweight, corrosion-resistant, reflective, and malleable enough to be shaped with basic tools. It doesn't rust. It doesn't degrade. It doesn't lose its properties under prolonged use. Open a can and flatten it. You have sheet metal. Polished internally with ash or sand, you've created a signaling mirror visible for miles. Sunlight reflected off aluminum produces a flash bright enough to attract rescue or communicate across distances when radios are dead. Cut the metal into strips and file the edges. Now you have cutting tools or arrowheads. Not ideal, but functional when steel is unavailable. Bend the metal into a cone, and you have a funnel or sound amplifier. Keep the can intact, punch out ventilation holes, and it becomes a cooking vessel or water kettle. Aluminum conducts heat efficiently. It heats up quickly and cools down quickly. Metal doesn't rust or degrade. Stack it, crush it, trade it. In a barter economy, aluminum cans are monetary raw material. Lightweight, durable, infinitely reusable. That thing you crushed and threw away for pennies. It's made from manufacturing material that will outlast you. Item 4. Soap residue. Those tiny bits that are left over when the bar gets too small to hold. You throw them away because they're annoying. Big mistake. Soap is a chemical weapon that requires neither electricity nor fuel. Soap molecules have a hydrophobic tail that embeds itself in lipid membranes and a hydrophilic head that binds to water. When you wash, you are tearing apart bacterial cell walls at the molecular level. Total annihilation. It's not hygiene. It's structural destruction of pathogens through surface chemistry. Collect the scraps, melt them with a minimum of water, and press them together. You've reconstituted a whole bar. Or grate them into flakes for rationed use. When antibiotics run out and infections become fatal, soap becomes the first line of defense. Wound cleaning, surface disinfection, personal hygiene that prevents the spread of disease. The difference between a cut that heals and one that leads to death. Soap also has barter value. People exchange food for cleaning supplies when desperation sets in. Every sliver you threw away was a coin you burned. That annoying leftover piece of waste you threw away. It's a sanitation system that works without infrastructure. 4 items. All of them were in your trash this week. None of them cost anything. None of them required special preparation. None of them needed space, a budget, or elaborate planning. They only needed one thing, which you didn't give them. Attention. You saw the previous chapter and thought, That makes sense. Then he continued throwing it away. Not out of malice, out of habit. Habit is the enemy. Habit is the operating system that civilization installed in you to keep the cycle running. Consume, discard, repeat. Don't question, don't store. Don't think about function, think about convenience. Convenience is a luxury of peacetime. The time of peace is over. Item 5. Glass jars and bottles. You recycle them because it's the right thing to do. Noble. Useless. Glass is a pre-industrial technology that has survived empires. It doesn't corrode. It doesn't release chemicals. It doesn't degrade under UV exposure. It doesn't absorb odors. It doesn't contaminate what it stores. It simply exists, inert and functional, for centuries. Airtight storage that keeps food dry and pests out. No plastic leaks, no metal rust. Fill a clear glass jar with contaminated water. Leave in direct sunlight for 6 hours. UV radiation penetrates the glass and neutralizes pathogens. SOTUS. Same principle as the plastic bottle, but glass doesn't scratch or become opaque over time. Efficiency doesn't decrease. The protocol works indefinitely. Deliberately break the glass and you've created cutting edges sharper than most industrial knives. Obsidian sharpness from disposable packaging. It's not desperate improvisation, it's physics. Conchoidal fracture produces cutting edges that rolled steel rarely achieves. Use intact jars for fermentation, preservation, or trade. In a barter system, a sealed glass jar is a premium container that people pay for. Not for the contents. For the container. That thing you handed in for recycling. It's a storage system that survives apocalypses. Item 6. Cardboard. That delivery box you flatten and throw away without a second thought. Layered compressed cellulose fiber for structural integrity. Simple engineering, brutal effectiveness. Insulating material that traps air in corrugated channels and slows heat transfer. Line walls with flattened cardboard and you've added a thermal barrier that costs nothing. It's not about comfort, it's about the difference in body temperature. It's the line between staying awake shivering and being able to sleep. It burns more slowly and in a more controllable way than loose paper, making it a reliable fuel when you need sustained heat, not just quick ignition. Stack layers and you create surprisingly strong structural panels to reinforce shelters or build partitions. Submerge it in melted wax or animal fat and it becomes waterproof. Suitable for emergency cover or ground protection. The difference between sleeping dry and waking up soaked when the rain arrives at 3 a.m. The material is lightweight, abundant, and requires no processing. You can write on it. Mark territory. Leave messages. Create maps. Use it for signage. When all else is gone, cardboard will still be available because nobody thought it was worth hoarding until it was too late. That box you disassembled for the recycling truck. It's construction material that weighs nothing and costs nothing. Item 7. Use cooking oil and grease. That solidified mass you scrape into the trash because throwing it down the drain clogs the sink. Congratulations. You've discarded liquid energy. Lipids are hydrocarbons. They burn. Not metaphorically, literally, chemically, physically. The same reaction that powers combustion engines that heated caves for millennia, that kept civilizations functioning before electricity existed as a concept. Break carbon bonds, release energy. Simple as that. Elegant as that. Pour used cooking oil into any container. Add a wick. Any fibrous material will do. Strips of fabric, cotton string, tightly rolled paper. You've built a lamp that produces light and heat for hours. The oil doesn't need to be clean. It doesn't matter if it's rancid. Fire doesn't have an expiration date. It metabolizes fat the same way your body does, breaking carbon bonds and releasing energy. Rancidity is superficial oxidation. The underlying lipid structure remains intact and combustible. Old grease also works as a lubricant for tools, hinges, anything that needs reduced friction. Coat metal with it, and you've created a barrier against rust. Passive protection that doesn't require any specialized chemicals. Mix fat with wood ash, and you have the basic ingredients for soap. Saponification. The chemistry is ancient and reliable. Entire civilizations produced soap with exactly these two ingredients for thousands of years before anyone invented the supermarket. In a world without electricity, light becomes a marketable commodity. People trade food for a few hours of light when desperation sets in, not because they are irrational, because total darkness for weeks on end destroys human psychology in ways that hunger cannot. That disgusting sludge you threw away. It's fuel, lubricant, soap base, and a barter system that never loses value. 3 items. All of them are in your trash right now. Not last week, now. As you read this, a potential lamp is in your trash. A storage system that could last for centuries is in your trash. Building and insulation materials are in your trash. You don't need money to get started. You don't need a specialized shop. You don't need military training or advanced technical knowledge. We need to stop throwing away things that still have a purpose. You need to learn to look at trash and see infrastructure. This is not paranoid preparedness. It is basic material literacy that every human generation has possessed up to yours. Here's what you really need to understand, not as a motivational concept, not as a self-help metaphor. As physics applied to the continuity of human life, wealth is not what you possess, it's what you're able to use. There is a brutal difference between these two things. A person with an apartment full of possessions, a state-of-the-art television, a healthy bank account, and a diversified investment portfolio will die of hypothermia at the same temperature that a person with drier lint and a lighter survives. Not because the universe is fair or unfair, because thermodynamics doesn't negotiate with social status. Specific heat doesn't read bank statements. Combustion doesn't check credit. Physics is democratic in the worst possible way. It kills rich and poor alike with equal efficiency when both lack the right knowledge. When systems collapse and supply lines die, your bank account becomes fiction and your assets become dead weight. What matters is function, physics, chemistry, the ability to solve physical problems with physical tools, not with money, with knowledge. And this is where it gets uncomfortable. Knowledge isn't what you Google when you need it. Knowledge is what's installed within you when Google no longer exists, when there's no signal, when there's no battery, when there's no one to ask and the decision needs to be made now, in the dark, cold, hungry, and scared. This type of knowledge cannot be improvised. You don't learn how to make fire when you're freezing. You learn it beforehand, you practice beforehand. You gather the materials beforehand, not because you're paranoid, but because paranoia and preparation are the same thing seen from different angles depending on the historical moment you're in. In 2019, keeping dryer lint was considered eccentric behavior. In 2025, it's applied intelligence. The dividing line between the two isn't the person, it's the context. Each item on this list represents a solution you threw away because convenience slowed you down. Not stupid, slow. There's a difference. Stupidity is permanent. Slowness is correctable. You've been conditioned to see trash as having no value. But trash is just a resource you haven't yet learned to appreciate. The system that conditioned you to discard it had an interest in that. Consumers who reuse consume less. Consumers who consume less generate less profit. Discarding wasn't a cultural accident. It was behavioral engineering, and it worked perfectly. Until the moment the system that created it stopped working. That's when engineering became a trap. The difference between survivors and casualties is not luck. It's not a stockpile. It's not a bunker. It's not an arsenal. It's the ability to look at what everyone else has discarded and see what still works. It's knowing that a plastic bottle is a portable water purifier, that dryer lint is guaranteed ignition, that an aluminum can is manufacturing metal, that leftover soap is preventative medicine, that a glass jar is a centuries-old storage system, that cardboard is insulation, fuel, and building material. That rancid grease is light, lubricant, and potential soap. It's knowing that gold doesn't boil water. It doesn't heal wounds. It doesn't warm the body. It doesn't filter pathogens. Gold is social consensus about value, and social consensus dissolves when society stops functioning. What doesn't dissolve is physics. What doesn't dissolve is chemistry. What doesn't dissolve is the direct relationship between resources, knowledge, and survival. Start collecting now, not tomorrow. Not when it seems necessary, now. Because when it seems necessary, it will already be too late. The moment the need becomes obvious is precisely the moment the resource disappears. That's how it was in supermarkets. That's how it was with masks in 2020. That's how it was with fuel in every crisis of the last 50 years. Scarcity doesn't give warning, it just appears. And when it appears, the person with a box of dryer lint and used cooking oil has more real wealth than someone holding gold bars in the dark. It's not philosophy, it's thermodynamics. It's physics applied to the difference between being alive and having been alive. Pay attention now.